Welcome to Conveyancing Matters and our chat with Mike Day. Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property. Hi, this is just a short post-chat addendum. During the chat, you will hear we talked to Mike about whether estate agents have to have professional indemnity insurance. After the chat, Mike has confirmed that whilst the majority of agents do hold professional indemnity insurance, indeed it's mandatory if they are members of the Ombudsman Scheme, Property Mark or RICS, there may be some who are not members of these bodies and who are part of the Property Redress Scheme where indemnity insurance is recommended but not mandatory.
So welcome to another Conveyancing Matters episode. Today we have a special guest, Mr. Mike Day. Mike, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Stuart and Lorraine. It's lovely to see you, lovely to be back.
Oh, likewise, Mike, likewise. Really nice to see you. We were just saying it's off air. It's probably COVID the last time we spoke to you, which is extraordinary, isn't it?
It is, and I think we were saying how quickly time flies, but as I'm sure we'll discuss today on other matters, time just seems to drag on and on and on when it comes to sort of progress in the market, for example. But we'll no doubt explore that as we go along.
I think we will. Well, before we jump in, Mike, to the conveyancing market, obviously very much relevant for our agent and conveyancer friends today with you as our lovely guest. For the kind of one person watching, Mike, who doesn't know who you are, as opposed to the hundreds that do you just want to give us a sort of tiny Mike Day potted history and remind us where you fit into the conveyancing pantheon? Because it's quite a significant fit, I think.
Well, 49 years in the industry now. So I started when I was 3. Various roles within the estate agency sector, including setting up, for example, the conveyancing operation at Connells about 25 years ago, where I was a director of a business called Conveyancing Direct. So I've always worked in residential. I'm a chartered surveyor by qualification and a fellow of the ALA and NAEA, and I hold a business degree, a master's degree from Reading University. Got about 1,400 estate agency clients and conveyancing clients, and I do a range of activities: training, mentoring, sort of business advisory, quasi non-exec director type stuff. Probably best known these days for being in the sort of compliance area rather than anything else. Still here, still alive and kicking.
Excellent, excellent. So, Mike, perhaps a slightly controversial place to start, but what's your view on where Connells is at now, for example? Because I sometimes see some, shall we say, maybe less than favourable comments occasionally on social media. So where are you on that one, Mike? Clearly, it's a business that you've got, that's very close to your heart. So, what's your view?
Well, it is 21 years since I left Connells, so they've had
not
time.
That close.
So they've had time to get it right. So yeah, I've had my own business now for 21 years. So it's a long time ago. Connells are by far the most successful estate agency group in the UK. So in terms of bottom line and performance and whatever, they come in for a lot of criticism on certain aspects of how they do things. But there's an awful lot of customers using them, and they, use them successfully. So I've got a lot of time for Connells. You hear all sorts of stories about all sorts of organisations, which I can't comment on because I don't know the detail. But as far as I'm concerned, first-class organisation amongst many other first-class organisations. But of course, there's plenty that aren't first class, and perhaps we'll touch on the plans for ROPA or non-ROPA as we go through as well, because clearly there's a sort of a feeling that there needs to be some change. We just haven't yet seen anything.
No, exactly. Well, so Stu, perhaps on the regulation of agents, what's your view? You've got very close relationships with a fair old few. So, Stu and Mike, what is your view on the regulation of agents? Maybe Stu first.
Well, I mean, first of all, I just cannot get my head around how we can have the introduction of material information, and particularly the level of content that's within there, and yet we don't have the regulation. It just seems all a bit arse about face to me. Surely the better option would have been to bring in the regulation and sort of take it step by step from there, because you're asking agents to comment on things without being horrible that they don't know much about. So surely regulation would have been the first step.
I'm going to take issue there to an extent, in so much we're not asking agents to, nobody's asking agents to comment on them. What they're asking them to do is to provide the information. And there's a big difference there between telling somebody that something's got something or hasn't got something or whatever, and then actually interpreting. None of what's being asked for involves interpretation. It's facts.
Correct. However, you must, appreciate that a client completing those forms will ask those questions, and will an estate agent, refer that client to a conveyancer at that point, or will they try to deal with, the questions and answers with a view that, process-wise, it'll be a lot quicker for them?
Can I jump in there? I was just going to say, before we jump on to what I think is clearly a really important discussion, particularly with someone as close to the coalface as you, Mike, around material information, do you want to just take a step back, Mike, for the benefit of the viewers who, perhaps have been in a cave for the last 2 years, and just give us a sort of thumbnail around, material information and the requirements that are now imposed on agents?
Okay, well, really, we are 16 years into these regulations, okay, because it's the Consumer Protection Against Unfair Trading Regulations 2008. So the reality is we've lived with these things for 16 years. What, of course, has happened is that national trading standards have taken it upon themselves to try and provide some clarity and guidance by suggesting, and in fact, mandating really, the provision of certain information, which they've described as A, B, and C. They've introduced all of those now. It'll be a good year or so before it gets any form of policing or whatever, but which prescribe, in the same way as we saw with the Property Misdescriptions Act back in the day, and that's now 11 years since that was repealed. So we're talking about providing certain amounts of information to the public. Now, that is talked about at this moment in time, the CRM systems that agents use, the portals where a lot of this stuff will obviously be displayed, bluntly aren't ready yet. So it's going to be a journey. But let's not think that this is anything new, because we've actually been living with this since 2008. It's just not been run,
Yeah, I think that's the thing. So Mike, the ABC, I don't think the A was too much of a problem. The B wasn't too much of a problem. I think the C for conveyancers is C for conveyancers. How serendipitous, because of course that's the information, the broad sort of list, if you like, of information that you and Stu were touching on, that essentially is requiring sort of more information about, rights, obligations, easements, basically, as Stu's observed, the content that strays very much into the conveyancer advice arena. And I think, Stu's point, well, Stu, you might want to expand on it, the how does an agent not comment, Stu? Let's go back to that point.
That's the issue. We're asking a client, aren't we, to complete these forms, and we know from sort of our side of the fence the amount of questions that we get when a client's complete their initial protocol forms. So, you'd assume it was going to be no different from the estate agency point of view. And of course, we're all, taught about the subject matters that are within the forms, whereas maybe estate agents aren't. So going back to the original point, you thought the regulation might have come in prior to the material information being brought in, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that, the information that we're talking about, which is things like, is it in a conservation area, or is it a listed building, or, things that affect the property planning and these sort of things, the stuff that you'd pick up maybe out of searches and other sort of things. Yes, a property information questionnaire, a TA6 type sort of approach is one thing, but you're asking a client who probably doesn't know the answers in half the cases. Let's be perfectly honest. So actually, if you really look at this information, as far as what trading standards are saying will need to be displayed, actually it's all available without asking the client. So, one can access most of this information, or if not all of it, by doing various checks and that oneself. Now, of course, the business opportunity is for estate agents and conveyancers to be working together. That's the business opportunity. And I mentioned briefly setting up Connell's conveyancing business 25 years ago. What we did at the time was we instructed conveyancers when the property went on the market. So sellers instructed the conveyancer at the time the property went to the market. Now, perfectly honestly, we did it because we were capturing the client, we were the catalyst for the process, etc., and we were making money out of it. Now, blah blah blah. But the byproduct was we locked 2.5 weeks off the average length of a transaction by getting in early and speeding things up. Now, at a time, transactions were 13 weeks. They're now 10 weeks longer than that or whatever on average. So we managed to, instead of turning our pipeline 4 times a year, i.e. every 13 weeks, we were turning our pipelines 4.7 times a year. That added countless millions, quite frankly, in the scale of Connell's to the bottom line. And that's the opportunity that estate agents and conveyancers have if they can get their backsides in gear and work together in a sensible commercial way.
What I'm interested there, though, Mike, is you say that was 25 years ago, and you say that, a Connell's client, a Connell's seller would instruct their conveyancer early. Why do you think in 25 years, if that kind of worked, and I'm not suggesting for 1 nanosecond it didn't, why hasn't that become the norm, do you think, Mike? Everybody says it, and clearly everybody's been saying it for 25 years. Sellers don't.
Tell you very, very simply, if the deal didn't happen, the conveyancer didn't get paid.
And surely that's not an unreasonable position, Stu. What's your view there?
Well, not my experience in the slightest. We ran more of a glorified marketing campaign than anything else in terms of structure and due diligence. But following HIPS, we put together what we called fast move packs. No different to what we're talking about now. Basically, get the agent to instruct the client, or ask the agent to get the client to instruct us when the property goes in the market, blah, blah, blah. We'd go out, we'd see estate agents with a view that we would be attracting the work. This we thought was our big sell, okay, the big thing that we can get, agents to give us work. And I would say 99% of the time, if not 100%, we would get the work come in, but there would be virtually zero appetite for agents to onboard clients at the point of marketing. My sort of perception of, say, Connell's doing it is, I think it's different because it's more of a captive market. It's the sort of more one-off, one branch agents that maybe don't have the knowledge, Mike, that maybe you would have had at that time, interjecting into Connell's and so on and so forth. And I think until such time as an estate agent cops a big fine, and it's publicly splashed over, all the different content outlets, I'm not sure the appetite will be there.
I think the one of the things we got was once we took a decision to do something, it happened. Okay, it wasn't, there was a 3-line whip. We didn't have members of staff in offices making their own mind up how they were going to do things. They were bluntly dictated to that this was the approach we were taking, and therefore do it or ship out. And when we introduced our conveyancing operation, we still had people who wanted to send their work to Fred round the corner and this sort of stuff. We had to have a couple of public hangings in order to get the point home that it was going to happen. Now, that's not going to happen in the vast majority of what is still a cottage industry in terms of small agents and whatever else. So you've got the carrot and you've got the stick approach. Clearly, the carrot is better than the stick. But you've also got a situation where in a estate agency, a lot of agents reward their staff for winning the listing. And they reward their staff for winning the listing, not winning the listing that subsequently sells, but for winning the listing, which is why you still see, a lot of talk about overvaluing and just getting the property onto the market. Now, so they get it on the market, they've earned their fee. Therefore, they're not going to do anything that they might perceive as causing them a little bit more grief or hassle or whatever. So, but that's an issue within the estate agents themselves as to how they run and manage their business. If they took the time to look at the numbers that I've seen and my experience and whatever of the benefits of reducing abort rates, identifying issues early and sorting them out, speeding up transactions, all of that sort of stuff, they wouldn't hesitate to do it. But
Right,
the other,
but-
sorry,
but-
just very quickly, the other point I made about conveyancers was we still get a lot of conveyancers who won't open a file unless they're going to get paid. And a lot of vendors don't want to set the clock running when they haven't got a buyer. And if we can overcome that element of it, and it would work for conveyancers as well, because of course they lock the client in and get the business. That's where I think working together would really pay.
Yeah. One thing I was just about to say then, Mike, is there some crazy stat, and you'll correct me because I could be completely wrong on this, that is it something like, I'm sure it's north of 50% of all sellers don't sell with the very first estate agent that advertises their property, which I can't believe that stat. I think it's unbelievable. And surely, again, this must massively help with the innuendo that you're locking a client in, because we used to try and sort of hit home that point with our fast move packs. You know, you might not get as many clients leave your services because they think they're locked in having completed this information.
Absolutely. I mean, it varies depending on the market conditions. Obviously, you know, extremely buoyant market. So we had, you know, just after COVID and that, we had obviously the stamp duty holiday, and bluntly, you know, you got the property on the market, it's sold. Market's different now, you know, whatever. So everybody will have seen their conversion rates suffer as a result of that. But it is true to say that most estate agents probably, if you took 100 listings, 100 properties they take to the market, there'd be, if they saw 60 of those reaching completion, that's probably close to the mark.
Yeah, it's a lot of unpaid work lost there, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, this, you know, we need both efficiency and effectiveness. You know, so
I think the thing is, though, Mike, and picking up from the conveyancer's perspective here, because of course, to be fair, 25 years ago, conveyancing firms, indeed estate agents, had nowhere near the regulatory responsibility that they do now. And of course, the point about it is that most firms now, most conveyancing firms really sort of can't and won't, you know, get a file, you know, be advising a client until they've done the enormous amount of onerous AML due diligence, which of course, bless you, you know more about than probably pretty much anyone in the country, given that you do so much training on it. So I do think that's a massive point for conveyancers. And of course, you know, you therefore have the issue of, well, you know, if the idea is that this information is going to be upfront and potentially advised upon upfront, then the conveyancers aren't going to be giving advice until they've done the due diligence, until they know the client is theirs. And therefore, given, frankly, something that hasn't improved in 25 years, really, the ratio of agent fee to conveyancer fee, you know, why should conveyancers take the hit when they're taking so much of the sort of professional and regulatory and indeed indemnity insurance responsibility?
Okay, let's explore that. The scenario, you're absolutely right. I mean, you know, there's more regulation and whatever, and this is why, you know, we're moving through things with the digital trust framework and some of the, you know, bits and pieces that, you know, the AML, take AML. You know, you currently have a situation where there's probably 3 different people doing effectively the same AML in the process. Now, you know, you can argue, oh, that gives 3 looks at it. So from the powers that be's point of view, you know, oh, they've got 3 different people looking at it. From the client's point of view and everybody else's point, it's a pain in the backside. And it's just not, you know, it just seems a nonsense. Now, we are moving towards, I see a situation where that information will be better shared across the so that will help a little bit there. But the real key here is, you know, you mentioned fees. Estate agency fees have come down in the last 20 years. You know, they may, because values have gone up, maybe the pound note value has still increased, but as a percentage of the transaction cost. But the reality is, any survey you ever see says that fees aren't the driving force for customers. Estate agents think they are. Conveyancers think they are. It's because they're pathetic salespeople. Okay, they're pathetic salespeople. Why do people buy Rolls Royces? Why do people buy Bentleys? Why do people buy Porsches or whatever when they could get from A to B in a Skoda, or, you know, good decent car actually, Skoda, but you know, in another vehicle? they perceive some value in it, whatever that is. Conveyancers have always been at the bottom of the pile when it comes to, the food chain of the housing transaction, which is why estate agents stepped in and started getting themselves in the position to be able to dictate the work. Unfortunately, majority of estate agents just see that as getting a couple of £100 referral fee out of the thing, instead of making a better transaction that is going to result, instead of it being 60% successful, perhaps 80% successful.
Yeah, it's
so
interesting.
it's a mind change. It's a mind change.
Yeah, well, Stu, yeah, and you've got views on culture change, because when we did our conveyancing around the world, we talked to obviously conveyancers from around the world, Mike, and Stu, you were you had views on the culture change and whether or not that was possible here, which seems to me exactly what Mike's suggesting.
Yeah, of course, it's the same thing, isn't it? If people have done something in the same way for years and years and years, they'll carry on doing it that way. That's firstly, and of course, using comparables from different countries will just never work, because too much change is required. But I think that kind of goes back to the original point and my worry with the material information, and it's how that is dealt with by the estate agent. And I fear there will be a temptation, should we put it that way then, to advise the client in a way that best suits the agent getting that property on the market, getting that property sold, and so on and so forth. I think that's the danger. And again, whereby you have a situation where the estate agent's opinion is held, and I'm not saying wrongly, by the way, but the estate agent's opinion is held in quite high esteem compared sometimes to the conveyancer's one.
Because estate agents talk to the client more.
Yeah.
Yes, no, seriously. I mean, in a face-to-face, most estate agents with the seller, at some point are in literally a face-to-face situation with them, and they're local to it and whatever else. Yeah. But you're absolutely right, and we do need better quality people in estate agency, which goes back to the Roper discussion. But none of this will happen, in my view, without a degree of mandation. Because, we've had Section 22 of the Estate Agents Act sitting there since 1979, never been enacted. OK, this is about competency. So this leads to the sort of qualifications and licensing. It's been there since 1979, nothing. Every government of any colour and whatever has always preferred competition to competency. And now we might see Roper. Now, I said when it was announced that I would be out of the industry before it came in, and I still think that is the case. Okay, Labour have said that they will bring it in, but it will then be a 4 or 5 year period, obviously, to get the thing up to speed and whatever. But would the market be better because of qualifications and licensing? Possibly. Certainly wouldn't do any harm. I mean, I've got all the qualifications under the sun, so I'm very pro qualifications and knowledge. But we also need a degree of mandation as to the process and whatever, in terms of who does what, where, and when. And as I go back, the current scenario that trading standards are asking people to produce, it's very specifically not interpretation or advice; it's facts. But I do fully accept the fact that there's going to be a grey line there, and until, as you said, somebody gets clobbered for it. Mm-hmm. Well, there's nothing like a good punishment, is there, to sort of get the thing going.
I think one of the issues, Mike, for me, and I think I say this every time, every forum I open my mouth, there's sort of a couple of things in it for me, and it's always around the fact that conveyancers have got indemnity insurance, the public clients are properly protected because of that. So, fundamentally, again, the issue comes to, well, where does the liability lie if something goes wrong? And of course, what people seem in all of this shooting match to have forgotten is that when we send a property information form to a seller client to complete, the conveyancer should, now whether they do is another matter, but the conveyancer should be actually reviewing the replies to the PIF to sort of sense check it and to check that it fits with the information that the conveyancer has. So, of course, my rather sort of, boring and simple point is if an equivalent has been knocking around for months that was filled in by the client and the estate agent months before, and only later on, when a buyer has theoretically relied on that material information, does the conveyancer come along and say, well, oh, actually, no, that's wrong, this isn't correct, etc., etc. Well, again, it's the conveyancers become the whipping boy. When we do our jobs and point something out to a client, the messenger gets shot. But of course, the irony there is, if we point something out, Mike, we're doing our jobs. That's what we're supposed to be doing. But I get concerned about the length of time between information being produced and put to the market via material information and potentially the conveyancer getting involved.
I think, and that's perfectly valid. Let's just dispel a slight myth about you're not the only people who have PI insurance. There isn't an estate agent in this country who is operating legally who doesn't have PI insurance. It's a mandatory requirement of the redress schemes, and it's a mandatory requirement for an estate agent to be a member of a redress scheme. So unless they're breaking the law, and I'm not suggesting there aren't a few people out there breaking the law, every estate agent has PI insurance. And it's a good point, because maybe they haven't thought about this because they go, because until the claims start happening. But the reality is they do carry PI insurance. But my whole ethos here, and I sit on the home buying and selling group, which, as you know, is a sort of a stakeholder group across the industry. It's done a lot of talking and maybe is seen as not as much action as we'd like to see yet, but it's like herding cats, as you can imagine, to speed up and improve the process. But the point is that the closer we can work together, the better. Now, going back to my Connells days, I know it was 25 years ago and the world was a different place, and it wouldn't be quite the same now. But the point was, we were getting the seller in the mindset. It's a bit like home information packs. Now, I was very pro home information packs. They needed refining, and then we got rid of them. And here we are now, basically saying what we need is home information packs, or if the equivalent of Scotland. I've got friends up in Scotland. And of course, they have the home report and whatever up front. You're selling by auction. You have a legal pack at the auction, which somebody, the buyer is meant to have read. We know they don't, but often in many cases, but nevertheless, it's there for them before they take the decision and the hammer falls. And if this is going to work, and I still accept the fact there's an if in it, that's what's got to happen.
I don't think anyone's disagreeing with the upfront information theory, though, are they? I think upfront information is fairly obvious, isn't it? It's the way in which the material information sort of crosses the murky line of what goes into conveyancing, what doesn't, what is of value to the client at that stage, what will actually the client digest? Because, of course, there are clients that you can send them a plethora of information, of course, they don't read it. So will they be more reliant on the material information that the estate agent gives them and potentially ignore things that we may give? I don't know. I just think it's just they've completely blurred the lines. It's very limited,
this. I mean, I was in a meeting within the last week with Rightmove, who are having to obviously rejig their presentation and that on the internet to accommodate this sort of stuff. And the CRM systems that agents use that feeds this stuff in have got to adjust. So it's not there yet. Rightmove will have it up by the end of June, I'm told. And if I look at what it includes, it's limited. Okay, it's more than they're doing now, obviously, but it's nowhere near the detail. It's not a conveyancing pack. It is not that level of detail. It's flagging things that somebody might want to then dig into more deeply. It is in no way replacing the work of a conveyancer. In any or attempting to in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I would go as far as to say that I'm not going to say it's not fit for purpose, because it's actually better than we have now. But there's going to be you look on Rightmove in July, and half the answers on the thing will say, "Ask the agent." Ask the agent.
But isn't that Stu's problem? Isn't that Stu's point?
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
Ask the agent. I think that, it's interesting, Mike, isn't it? Because somebody with your knowledge and experience and depth of experience in the market, if somebody who is as pro the principle as you essentially is saying, well, look, this is the least worst option, it's not a ringing endorsement, is it really? And particularly for somebody who's on the home buying and selling group. And again, that's that's just an observation. I just think personally, I feel it's an opportunity missed again.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I think it's like if you go take Roper, will Roper solve the thing? No. Will having everybody having a demonstrated a greater level of knowledge help? Probably. Okay. Will that speed up the home buying process in itself? No. We've already got a ton of regulation. What we haven't got is decent enforcement.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to come on to, Mike. That's the $64,000 question, which kind of pulls a lot of the threads together that we've mentioned, whether it's on the indemnity insurance, the misrep front, whatever. What's the issue? Is it trading standards that are supposed to be enforcing this?
Well, we don't have one regulator looking after different bits. We've got HMRC, policing us, the estate agency sector, policing, supervising AML compliance. Okay, so we've got HMRC. We've got trading standards dealing with sort of the Estate Agency Act stuff and consumer protection stuff that we're talking about. So you've got sort of different. You've got the ICO obviously dealing with sort of data protection issues, etc. So you've got these different bodies. Now, the plan with Roper, my God, this is a big egg, of course, is to end up with some sort of regulator across the industry. There'll be a cost to that, probably quite a large cost. We've got two redress schemes. We've got the Property Ombudsman Scheme. We've got the PRS. Okay. We then got, if you start dragging conveyances in, we've then got the CLC. We've got the SRA. We've got Uncle Tom Cobley and all in this. So there's an awful lot of different people dealing with different elements. And I don't think, if I'm honest, that doesn't help. I'm not a great one for big government. I prefer sort of the thing being a bit more self-regulation. But, it's going to take a lot of pulling together.
Is it trading standards that are supposed to be enforcing the compliance with material information specifically, Mike?
Yeah, but they're on record as saying that, they're really doing, they're out there doing a great job. I speak at a number of Property Mark conferences, and James Munro from the Estate Agency Division of NCS is pretty much all of those, doing a very good job of getting the message out there and what it means and whatever else. But there's no enforcement. There's no real enforcement. And of course, if you think about it, who's going to, let's say the material information that is put out there either isn't put out there or it's not very good. Okay. Who suffers? Okay. Who suffers is potentially the buyer. Okay. If you were a consumer and you were upset, you don't go to trading standards. You go to the agent and complain, and if you're not happy with the answer, you end up going to one of the redress schemes. Because in the event of them finding in your favour, any award that is made, any compensation award goes to you, the consumer. If you go to trading standards, and trading standards did investigate and take some action, the consumer doesn't get anything other than the satisfaction.
And Stu, we've talked about this a lot. I mean, that, of course, is the issue for conveyancers, quite frankly, again, sort of arcing back to the indemnity insurance point, Mike, because, well, Stu, it's just easier for the conveyancer just to pay out or decrease the bill, just to move on, isn't it, really, if we get a complaint?
Unfortunately, there is that growing trend, isn't there? We've discussed it, Lorraine, before, haven't we, about, reliance on indemnity insurance over due diligence, and it's a dangerous sort of way to go. Mike, I've got a quick question. Going back to estate agents indemnity, what does that cover? Are there any limitations on that? Because I wasn't aware that they actually had indemnity insurance.
Right. As an agent, you have to be a member of one of the redress schemes, and as I say, the Ombudsman or the PRS. There is a requirement on PI insurance for that, and I've got a feeling it's probably about £500,000 worth of cover. So it's not multi-million. I think it depends a little bit, obviously, on your business and whatever else. Would it cover this area? I'll be perfectly honest with you, Stuart. I don't know.
Really
Okay,
interesting to
because
find out.
this is now it would from the point of view that we already have things happening under consumer protection regulations, have had for the last 16 years. I've got clients who've inadvertently not told somebody something. Because, of course, one of the things about consumer protection regs, the difficult thing, it's not what you tell people, it's what you don't tell people that's the real, it's the omissions bit that's the real difficult stuff. We're used to, with the Property Misdescriptions Act, we know if we say it's got gas central heating and it's got electric central heating, that's obviously wrong. And therefore you potentially get clobbered for it. But it's what information do you have to provide or not? What is material information? Because what's material information to you, somebody else might not regard that as material information. It may not affect their decision making. And that's why trading standards have come up with this list of things that they're trying to do, because they're suggesting that all of that is definitely material information. There's a whole raft of other stuff that, ultimately it would take the courts or whatever to decide whether it was. So, for example, the property's been sold because somebody's died. Is that material information? Okay, I view it, I say it is. People say, oh, well, it wouldn't matter to me whether somebody had died or not. I say, well, what if they had their head hacked off in the lounge and their body parts flushed down the toilet? Oh, Christ, yeah, I'd want to know about that. So where do you draw the lines on some of this stuff? Okay, now, that's not on the list. You're not going to see on Rightmove, somebody murdered in this house or something, or whatever, or committed suicide or something terrible.
They could simply have died in the property. Doesn't have to be that might be off-putting to somebody.
Exactly. So what is material? So that they've decided on things that are not for interpretation. It's either in a conservation area or it isn't. It's either got mains drainage or it hasn't. It's either, it's that type, it's facts. But I see it as a stepping stone. And I do see the points you're making about some, shades of grey, shall we say, probably more than 50.
You took the words out of my mouth there, Mike. 50 shades, absolutely. And do you know what? If that was on Rightmove, people would look at it, wouldn't they? Quite frankly.
Yeah. But it might be a new sales technique.
Exactly. But I think the nuance is the point, isn't it? And as you say, it is, putting all jokes to one side, it is the shades of grey, because having a planning permission, for example, is one thing. Being able to interpret it, raise the right inquiries about it, establish whether or not whatever has been built in pursuant to that permission has still been built, in accordance with that permission, etc., etc. It's that level of detail. The fact that there might be a planning permission is slightly irrelevant, isn't it? And of course, Mike, your point actually, this is a classic, isn't it? Because it's the omissions, because of course there might be an extension at the property that should have had planning permission and didn't, and nobody would know about it. So it is that.
Yeah, that's where an agent. If a property has been extended, they ought to be ascertaining whether or not it's had the appropriate consent. Of course, it may not have needed planning permission. It might have just needed building control consent or whatever. But this is the sort of areas which agents are getting caught at now under consumer protection, and they're paying out millions of pounds in under the counter sort of ex gratia sort of payments to sort of make people go away, which was the point Stuart was making, is happening to a certain extent with conveyancers. So that's across the piece, there's millions of pounds being shelled out in these sort of areas. We're trying to get to a situation, the interpretation of a planning, what the material information would do would flag the existence of a planning consent, for example, or should do. Okay. It's then up to that buyer's, to take the advice of their conveyancer or whatever as to what. But this is before they view the property. Remember, this is the whole point about upfront information. It's meant to be there, timing-wise, before they take a transactional decision. And if somebody's taken a day off work and flown down from Glasgow to Brighton to look at a property, and then they find that there's something that they should have known about in advance, they're not happy. And that's where the thing starts to blow up. This should start to reduce those situations. It won't change the work of conveyancers and everything else later on. Let me give you an example. One of the things on material information is the council tax band. Okay, so you have to have the council tax band on a property, not the actual council tax payable, because of course that changes, year on year, but the council tax band. But how many estate agents are aware that on a property there is a flag, and I've forgotten the name of it, something like an improvement indicator or something on the flag. So if you go to search on the government website, so if you search on my house here, band G, both improvement indicator, yes. What that means is that there's been work done on this property. So, my house is almost double in size since the council tax banding was done. What that means is that if we were to sell it and move, they will reassess it. So the agent has told people that it's G. It may not be by the time they move in. It might be. Now, I don't think agents know that. No, I'm not even sure if conveyancers do, but
yeah, I mean, I suppose I guess a fair few would, but because that would be part of the advice that we would give. But I just think the areas for grey are so huge. So, Stu, how do you
I'll tell you another analogy with this information could be the auction scene. We do a lot of auction work here, and we always try and punt clients having an auction pack review before they bid on the property. The percentage that do would be, well, it wouldn't be 1%. It's so minimal. The volume of, the amount of people I found, it's staggering, that will go and spend 100, 200,000 pounds, not have the pack reviewed. And then when we get the conveyancing, we have to tell that client, oh, by the way, did you have the pack reviewed? No. Did you know about this? No. Oh, I don't want to buy it now. Well, it's too late. That happens regularly.
You've only got to watch Homes Under the Hammer, haven't you? If you're sitting at home on a Tuesday morning or whenever it is, you watch Homes Under the Hammer, and there's some muppet who's bought a property and they say, did you look at it before you bought? No. Did you have a survey? No. Did you look at the legal pack? No.
Yeah, I think there's a common perception that it can't be wrong. It wouldn't be wrong. Society couldn't work that I could spend that amount of money and potentially lose it. But we're seeing all sorts of problems, and of course people don't realize that people are properties put into auction for a reason, one of which is that you can't sell it on the open market. So be careful. And that kind of analogy and the amount of people that look at that information up front is so limited. That's why I, again, using this as a comparable to the material information, are people going to look at it?
Well, it's just, going back to things like Roper and whatever, is the public clambering for this? If you do a survey of the public and say, do you think estate agents should be qualified? Of course, the answer is yes. They'll say, yes, of course they should be, both. But they're not making their decisions based on that. They don't go around saying, are you a qualified estate agent or anything? That's not how they make their decision. They're usually making it, because the agents are so poor, on fee. And that we all know that is not the key decision, or shouldn't be the key decision maker. So the public have got a part to play here as well.
Yeah, but I don't think they will. I agree with Stu. I mean, I think it's a discussion for another day. I mean, I'm not going to go down the leasehold rabbit hole, but everybody that talks about leasehold in politics at the moment seems to think that all leaseholders are desperate to manage their own blocks. No, they're not. They don't want to. They don't want to know. All they want is their blocks to be properly managed by proper organisations and reasonable, proper fees are payable. That's all they want. They don't want to be piddling around sorting out the roofers themselves. They're not, they're not interested. So all this nonsense about giving control to leaseholders is absolutely, nothing could be further from the truth, in my opinion, and I absolutely agree. So, well, maybe we ought to bring this discussion to an end, Mike. What I tell you, I'd love to do is get you back in autumn when Rightmove have had their info up for 2 or 3 months, theoretically, because we'll either be sitting here saying, "Oh dear, Rightmove didn't do it," or we'll at least have the opportunity to see how we think it's working out. So, Stu, before we go, have you got any sort of final views on material information, and then we'll perhaps ask Mike to give his view to conclude.
I just think the whole thing's messy. I think the lines are blurred. I think the information exchange between conveyancer agent and client is going to be very, very, very blurred. And I'm not sure as a client, an innocent client buying a property that's not that educated in the process is going to really understand why they're being sort of, presented with everything from all different angles. So I think there's problems that are going to arise from it. And as we've kind of already discussed, will it actually speed things up? I don't think it particularly will.
I don't actually, but what's just occurred to me, Stu, you saying that is in some cases, you know, the agent conveyancer relationship isn't that good anyway, because it's often the agent saying it's the conveyancer delaying everything. Well, it'll be interesting when the boot's on the other foot and all that information has to be produced up front by them. They might have a little more sympathy for the position of the conveyancer. But Mike, perhaps to conclude, what's your view from a man with your experience in the industry?
Well, I think, we're in that situation where, you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. And we're certainly in that sort of scenario at this moment in time. So we could all say, do you know what, this is too much of, too difficult. Let's not bother. Okay. And do that. Or we try and change it. Is it going to be a smooth ride? No. But, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. I think we're 16 years too late in making that single step because the regulations came in 2008 on material information. ROPA, as I say, I've got all the qualifications under the sun, blah, blah, blah. So I'm all for education and whatever. Is that in itself going to speed things up? No, it's going to add costs and whatever. I think the next 5 years are going to be a very interesting one. But one thing I am convinced about, and that is the firms that take a strategic view and looking at the holistic picture, not just getting the house on the market, but seeing it all the way through to completion and working with whoever they've got to work with in that process. And clearly conveyancers are a key part of that. Finding a way of working in the consumer's interest will not be fee sensitive because it'll be performance sensitive. And if I was an agent and I could show that 80% of my properties sold, not 50% of them, that would help me justify a higher fee, for example. And conveyancers need to wake up and do much the same, in my view.
Oh, well, that I think is, a really interesting and a very punchy place to finish, Mike. So it is absolutely delightful to see you again. And thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure that, we'll return rapidly to this topic, I think, won't we, Stu?
Definitely, yes. One that's going to come up and bubble in the future, isn't it? Most certainly. That's one that's definite.
It's going to run and run. Well, thanks for joining us, Mike. Take care now.
Thank you. Cheers.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.